I'm going to show you how to draw in a pointillist style. Pointillism was an art movement founded by the French artists Georges Seurat and Paul Signac. It was developed in 1886, and it's basically a technique where you use lots and lots of dots to draw. Signac and Seurat used paint. We're not going to use paint though. We're going to use markers. Markers are perfect for this. And you can draw anything you want. You can do a landscape, a piece of fruit, an animal, a still life, and we're going to color it using only dots. So I'm doing this frog picture. My frog is orange, and there's a full range of values from red to yellow. So I'm going to start with my reds in the darker areas. So anywhere where he is shadowed and where there's a lot of red, I'm going to put my dots much closer together. So we know that shadows or darker edges are often on the underside and anywhere where the light is not able to hit. Now my frog is not actually red, he's more of an orange color, but I will build in some yellows and some oranges with my reds, and your eye is going to optically mix those dots together and see an orange color. So right now I'm just going along the contours of my frog because that's where he's the darkest. You want to be really careful to only use dots. Sometimes my marker slips a little bit and I'm almost creating a bit of a line. You really don't want to do that. You want to do only dots. So the closer together I put my dots, the darker that area is going to look. You're basically creating a darker value because you're putting your dots closer together. The less paper you see sticking out under your dots, the more color you see, and the more color you see, the darker your value is. So that's a good starting point for my frog. Notice how I'm not actually tracing the pencil lines. I'm not actually drawing them in with my marker. I'm only using dots. Now I'm going to switch to an orange, and I'm always looking at my reference photo, trying to figure out where is my frog darker. And wherever he's darker, that's where I'm putting more dots closer together. Now here on his back, he's quite dark, but he's not as dark as he is in the shadowy areas. But because he's still quite dark here, I'm going to put my dots close together, but I'm using the orange to do that. I'm not using the red to do that. If I use the red to do that, then it would end up looking a lot darker than I want it to look. But because I'm using orange and not red, it looks a bit lighter. You can see the more I dot, the darker he starts to get. But before I get too dark, I'm going to switch to a yellow. And I'm going to put some yellow dots over here. He's definitely very light here, so I want to keep my dots far apart. I also want to use a lighter color. You could use the same color though. You could use an orange, but just keep your dots really far apart. But I think it's nice to use different colors because you can see that your brain is probably mixing these colors together, these oranges and reds. Your brain is seeing these not as dots, but as a color. Imagine this is paint and we're mixing it. What would happen if you mixed red and orange and yellow with paint? You would get some kind of a reddish orange yellow color, and that's what your brain is doing. It's actually seeing these dots mixed together. That's called optical mixing. Now once you've gone this far, you can look at it again and reassess. Now I'm thinking he needs to be a little darker down here. I'll probably have to adjust and continue to darken some of those darker areas. I'm taking a different yellow now, and I'm adding a little more yellow into my oranges and my reds. I'd say that's it for the frog so far. Now I'm going to work on his eye. I'm going to start with this light tan color. And wherever his eye is lighter, I'm going to tap in a few dots, keeping them really far apart because this is the part of his eye that's quite light. Now the top part of his eye is a little darker, so I'll use a darker color. And I'm putting the dots closer together. Then he has his pupil, which is black. There is a light spot, which I'm going to leave white. And I've left this little dot here to make it look like that's the light spot in his eye. Anytime you draw an eye, animal or human, you always have to think about adding a light reflection spot in the eye. That helps to make it look realistic. Now up here on the upper edge of his eye, it's definitely more shadowy, so I'm going to put in a little bit of black dots. Now I think I can make the eye a little bit more dynamic, which basically just means a little more interesting. If I add another color, I'm going to add a bit of yellow. That's going to help to make his eye look like it's shining a little bit more. To help define the area, I might darken with my red because he's quite dark down here. I might actually take a little bit of this brown and tap it in a little bit into my red to darken the shadow area. So because I'm adding some brown into my red, it's really helping to deepen my red color. I might use this in other places where I feel like the red needs to be darker. Because down here he is a little bit more shadowed. The bottom of his toes and feet. And then he has these little nails, which are quite dark. So I'm going to tap in lots of little dots, very close together. Let's test it out with some purple. Now purple is next to red on the color wheel, and so because they're near each other, the colors are going to mix pretty seamlessly. So this is a very dark purple, and I'm using it the same way I used my brown, just to show you that it works with other colors as well. I'm going to add a few more spaced out purples here because I want to create a little darkness but not too much. So I'm going to make my dots further apart. Do you see how when I space them out more, when I put them down with more space between them, it still darkens my picture a little bit but not too much. I'd say that's about as much as I want to do right now. Now I've added some leaves in the back and he's on a log. You can just leave your drawing like this, just whatever object it is, a fruit, an animal, or you can put it into a setting. Of course, if you put it into a setting, your picture will look more interesting because there's just a lot more happening. There's more of a story going on. So I'm going to do some of my leaves. Now for these, I'm using green, lots of different greens, and I'll probably use some yellows and some blues too, because those are all next to each other on the color wheel. The same way that red, orange, yellows, and purples are next to each other on the color wheel. I'm going to use a lighter green. We know that in nature, nothing is just one color, so even though this leaf is mostly green, I'm going to add a few blues in as well, because blue and green, the combination of blue and green together is going to make a blue-green color, and this leaf here is quite blue-greenish. It's a tropical leaf. I'm going to add in a bit of yellow because leaves are not only blue-green, but they're also yellow-green. Some are blue to darken the dark side of my leaf. Now for the log, I'm going to very loosely put some dots in to indicate the log. The log has a bit of a texture because it's wood. There are some darker edges indicating a little bit of the texture of the bark. But I want to go pretty light on this area because I don't want to overwhelm my picture. There's already a lot of dots going on. So I want to keep this area a little bit less busy. Of course, underneath, there's going to be a little more dots because he's casting a shadow on the log. I'm going to use a combination of browns and grays. So now that I've done most of my log, I'm going to go back into my frog with a little bit of black and just put a few dots down where the edge of his body is. This is going to help me better be able to distinguish where my frog is against the background. I don't want my frog and the background that he's sitting on to get confused. You don't want to overdo this because you don't want to create a line or any kind of contours, but I'm just trying to darken the bottom edges, the shadowy edges of my frog. I might even take a very dark blue and darken some of the green area around my frog. That's going to help darken the shadows in my green leaves. Now when you're finished, you can erase any pencil lines that maybe you still see. I'm going to add a few more dots down here because I want to create some visual weight down here. And I can imagine that the log he's on is also curving. So there might be a shadow here where the log curves. I can even put a few light blue dots around here to create kind of a distant sky. I want to space them out a lot so that my sky is still nice and bright. The rest of my composition is very busy, so I don't want to create too much confusion, but by putting a few light blue dots in the sky, my brain quickly tells me, oh, that's the sky. And it helps to fill up the composition nicely. So I've added a little bit more brown into the bark of my log. I've added a light blue sky. And that is my frog in a pointillist style using simple markers, which all of us have at home. This technique is based on the pointillist art movement. I find it's quite fun to do and quite fascinating to see how your eyes optically mix the colors. And there are no contours here, it's just dots. So I challenge you to give it a try. So you can choose something that's quite simple, like maybe just an apple or even just a sphere. Or you can do an animal. Don't choose something that you think will challenge you, but something that you think you'll also have fun with, okay? I am looking forward to seeing what you do.